Good morning. This is Donna Blethen, um, and my wonderful son Eldon Rayuvala, uh, coming together today to talk about safety and a tool we're creating called the safety wheel.
Hmm.
What would you like to say, Dave?
Just hi, hello, and welcome wherever and whenever you are.
Mhm.
I'm Eldon, and yeah, really excited to go into like safety as both a concept and a state um, that I personally am obsessed with and have been. I was realizing I think it was yesterday. Like safety has been on my mind a lot because we've been working on the safety wheel, which we'll share in this episode, and we'll actually have like a one pager, including the wheel, that'll be available for anybody that's listening to this as a downloadable. And there's more resources that we're building out around this that are coming shortly. Just putting that up front. So keep an eye out. Information will be in the show notes, as well as on our website at www.wiredforconnection.life. Again, that'll be linked. So I've been sitting with safety a lot lately, and I realized I was like, oh wow, I think I've been obsessed with safety like most of my life.
Mm.
Um, and was actually recalling like a particular experience around mountain biking, um, where I can remember it was very early in my years of mountain biking, which was like a center point for my life for a lot of years. Um, and I can remember it was the first time I went down a particular section of a particular trail in Pacifica where I had to go over a log that was facing downhill. And it was like I can remember going over the log. Well, first off, I can remember psyching myself to go up and over the log, and it took a while. I was terrified, did not feel safe doing this. My body was giving me all kinds of signals: don't do this, don't do this. And when I went over the log, I froze.
Mm.
And
Hey.
just to put this in context, I'm going down a steep hill off a log where I'm in the air, followed by a steep hill and other implements all over the place. There's jumps and stuff, and I froze. It was a really bad time to freeze, and ended up like getting hurt, like going off like head over heels down the hill. I was just realizing, I'm like, wow, like back then, like my relationship with mountain biking was a relationship of learning how to feel safe when I didn't.
Mm.
Um, anyway, I think that I'm sharing that example just because it feels alive for me, and I think I'll bring it back in again in a little bit. But Mom, what I wanted to touch base with you around is like, so what is safety to you, and how do you experience it?
Safety to me is when I feel inside my body, in my mind, in my emotions, and in my physiology, calm and centered, able to breathe freely, able to look around where I am and uh, feel that anything that's around me is um, open, spacious, accepting. So I guess it would be a state of accepting internally whatever's happening as well as externally. And in talking about safety or thinking about safety as we've been doing this wheel, what I keep coming back to is my concept of that we each have a higher self that is observing the thoughts, the feelings, the body physiology, and that when I'm in touch with that aspect, I might be having a thought, a feeling, or a body physiology tension, which was to me is the opposite of safety. Tension is scared or tight or constricted. That when I breathe into that and breathe into my higher self and make sure that I'm connected to higher self, I also feel safe
Mm,
then. So it's interesting. There's two levels for me. There's the body safe, and then there's the higher self safe.
mm, mm. Okay, so I like what you just brought in. So you started by describing like body safe,
Hmm.
um, and then went into like maybe a moment when your body doesn't feel safe, where you can connect into something that supports you in creating safety for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's a really valuable tool, and I feel like it's important to acknowledge that that tool, well, one, it takes a lot of practice to be able to use that.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing that comes in is like, I feel like sometimes for myself, I have used that type of tool to fake safety
Hmm.
as opposed to create safety.
Yeah, I have it a little different. I
So,
have it.
well, hold on, I'm talking my experience. So let me,
Sorry, sorry.
right?
Yes,
Because right there, right? That's so that like for me,
constricted. Right,
that constriction feels that's unsafe to me,
right. Thank
right?
you
So this is great because I get to bring it out.
for making it
Because
real and live. Right.
so for me, in my experience, I can bypass my body and use my higher mind concepts to generate what I quote these in quotes think is safe. My body may or may not actually be along for the ride. I'm going to bring this back into mountain biking, right?
Hmm.
So I race downhill competitively up to the professional level, like 15-year career, right? In that time, there's something that's called riding scared, right?
Mm.
And when you're riding scared, you basically like you're stiff.
Mm.
You're not fluid, but you can trick yourself. I can trick myself into thinking that I'm okay, even when my body is not okay. And in that, I put myself into situations that aren't safe for myself because I'm not actually caring for my safety, right? I do the same thing in relationships. I can be in a place where I feel safe enough to stay in the relationship in that moment, right? So, say, like, I'm in an argument with my partner, I can trick myself into thinking that I am safe because I have the capacity to disconnect from my body physiology, right? By just going, if I'm just going up to higher mind state, right? And mom, I want to clarify, I know that may not be what you're saying, right? Like what I heard you say is higher power. So we're thinking like source energy, God energy, like whatever someone's words might be around that. And that is different, but also like can be similar. So it's like it's one step short of that is the thinking myself into safety. And I bring that in because that's something that is a pitfall for me.
Hmm.
Is that landing and making sense for you?
It does. And thank you for stopping me when I was intruding on your presentation. And now I want to come back to my experience of what you're talking about is another part. It is not higher self. It's a part that says, body, I'm sorry you're scared. I still want to do this and I'm going to do it because I am going to take control of my mind. And I'm a mind part that is taking control of any scared parts or the body that's scared and saying, I'm going to, I'm going to overrule all of you and drive this body down this hill.
Mm,
That to me is not higher self.
sure.
That is another mindset. And I love, I'm just learning from Rev Bridge this whole uh, comedic philosophy of mentalism,
Hmm.
and how what we do with our minds is we create realities. But to me, the higher self is beyond the what the human mind is creating.
Mm.
I don't know if I can say that very well, but
No,
and yeah.
I mean it lands for me. Um, okay, so you brought in this idea of parts,
Yes.
and it's something that we've talked about on the podcast before, and I know what you're talking about, but do you think you could just bring that to life a little bit more, just like what are parts and how do they come about and act?
Certainly. So this is uh, There's different theories about parts in the psychological world. My latest training has been through the internal family system method. Neurolinguistic programming used to talk about this. There's lots of different. So, in my humble way that I define it, it's that we have a higher self, then we have um, parts that are both protector parts to keep us alive, safe, or in this case, following goals that we really want.
Hmm.
And protector parts come in two forms. One is called managers, who manage all the others, and the other are called firefighters, which are when we're freaked out, we will go to some extreme. When we're feeling really unsafe, we will go to some extreme. And firefighters don't care about the aftermath, they just care about the danger perceived by the body mind, the body mind emotions. Um, and there's usually a lot of cleanup after that. And then we have younger, more vulnerable parts that are uh, needing to be listened to, cared about, and typically reparented, um, because they get stuck in time when scary, dangerous, hurtful, sad, overwhelming things happen. There are parts from in utero on that get stuck in time and frozen in time, and then will create fears or aversions or behaviors that compel us and we don't even know why. They feel very out of control. So the protectors are protecting those vulnerable little ones. And then the higher self is one that says, hey, I'm here. I can help you with these. We can free up the body. We can free up the mind. We can free up the emotions. There are many burdened beliefs about oneself or the world that come out of woundings that weren't known how to be tended to in our growing up years. So that's how I think of parts.
Hmm.
And there's lots of different ideations of that out in the world.
Sure, sure. And so just to reflect and respond, what I'm hearing, and I want to bring in the safety wheel here in a minute because everything that you just said like is like very aligned with what we've
Yeah,
been creating.
right.
Um, so you talked about firefighters and managers. The managers piece I want to like push on a little bit, but I'm not going to yet. Um, I have resistance to being managed in general, internally and externally.
Well, but yeah, okay, go for it.
So, and I'm putting that here, but so firefighters to me are like just pieces. So it's like a persona that I go into when I'm feeling unsafe, when something has to change for me to be safe,
Right.
right?
And directly and fast.
Right. So it's a reactionary, right? So this is where like we have like the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response is engaged, and I know that like I have to do something to create safety right now, and it has to happen now. It's not a thought; it's a reaction. It's like it comes up, right? So like that being a protector part, right?
Yes.
And then like when I think of managers, or like I think I like the word nurturers, or like cultivators, like if I'm thinking of like someone that wants to proactively, so responsively, like they feel capable, they know what to do, they know how to do it, and they can do it before. So it's like with my daughter, right? So like I'm going to externalize this, right? So my daughter is a child, she's 6.5. I can watch her behavior and know, oh, she needs to eat some protein right now, otherwise we're going to have a meltdown, right? she
Mm.
needs she needs she needs some stabilizing food, right? And that's something, so like that would be like the manager or the nurturer that's going to, so like for myself, like it's like I'm in a conversation with my partner, I can feel myself starting to get elevated. If my nurture protective part is capable of stepping in, it's going to be like, hey, I'm going to take a deep breath, I'm going to pause for a second, so that the firefighter doesn't have to come out.
Right. I think I would define this nurture you're talking about more as your higher self.
Mm,
Telling the manager, I got this. You don't have to manage it by, you know, like in the tension that your body
hmm
feels. I do believe, though, that managers think ahead. They go,
Mhm,
okay, it's been 2 hours. She will not have eaten for 2 hours. I better have protein snacks in the car, let's say
mhm,
when I get her from school.
mhm.
Um, so this idea of a manager, it's kind of interesting because the higher self, it to me is the nurture. Not that the managers can't be nurturing, but they really come more out of protection and tension, for lack of a better way. And maybe
Okay,
that's, but um, what you're talking about to me feels more higher self.
cool.
Like when I'm in my higher self and I'm anticipating, I can be grounded and calm and compassionate and centered and connected and map out a much better afternoon with my daughter than if I'm in some reactivity that I have to, let's say, I didn't plan and now I have to manage her,
Mhm,
or I have to manage me in this state of disconnection of, oh my God, she is having a meltdown. I didn't think of this. And now I have to manage without going into fight or fighter, both her agitation and mine about this breakdown in her body that's happening called I haven't eaten and I'm melting.
mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I also, so what we're talking into right now feels really timely, and I just want to bring it in here, right? So, like, we're talking about terms,
Yes,
right? And in that terms, you're clarifying what your language means,
correct.
and I have the opportunity to clarify what my language means.
Right.
And so we're talking about similar energetics that we both experience, but we might use different language and resonate with different language. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
going to call mine a manager.
nice.
I don't want a manager inside me. And like part of this whole thing that we're doing is like I want people that are listening to us and working with us, at least for myself, to have the freedom to build the language that is theirs.
This is lovely. So this is like the individuation from my concept to your personal experience and how you want to language it, and the invitation to anybody who's listening to do the same. It's like we're in motion. We're in the action of doing it. That's lovely. That's lovely.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Um, but so coming back to this idea of parts, right? So I really like the idea of parts. I have always looked at parts. I really like the visual of like a Russian doll.
Uh-huh.
Um, and just like the, you know, like this tiny center doll, and then they like these little, like bigger and bigger and bigger like casings around that. And I think of that tiny center doll as like it's like the original doll. It's like this is like the original signature that I bring into the world, right? So I always think of infant. It's like this is like
Yes.
maybe not even postnatal infant. This might be in utero infant, right? Like the original casing
Mm-hmm.
of the human form. And that every experience that I have in my life, especially significant experiences, build a new doll,
Mm-hmm.
right? And each doll is unique in its size and scope, but is still like built in the same shape as that original doll.
Mm-hmm.
And it's built in a way that is meant to hold that original doll,
Mm-hmm.
that original like core essence.
Right.
And in that encasement, like every single aspect that evolves outwards or grows outwards or is built outwards, at its core is there to encase and protect what's beneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And that protection can take many, many different forms. But if I'm bringing this back into like this idea of safe and unsafe, and I love what you said about safety in terms of like the embodied reality of like what safety feels like for you. I want to take a moment here and just invite in that like anybody that's here listening to this, like there's a question, it's like what is safety to you?
Right.
Right, because like we have ideas of what safety is and understandings of what it is for us, and those may resonate completely with you or they might not.
Right.
And so what is it for you? Right. And then like I mentioned in the beginning, like this thing with mountain biking and like freezing up and ending up going over the handlebars, et cetera. And like my obsession with safety has come from feeling very unsafe and actually choosing environments where I felt very unsafe for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I won't go into like the analysis of why or why I chose to do those things, but it was so this piece of what is safe to me in my body, and then what's the opposite of that?
So I'm hung up on something.
Go ahead.
I am wondering if I, Eldon, knew what I know now at the top of that bike uh, adventure,
Mm-hmm.
what would I have done differently?
Mm.
How would I have worked with my body? Could I have worked with my body? Would I have needed to give up the jump? Like, because it's interesting, because safety on that jump to me was I've got to get really focused. I got to get really breathed. I'm going to do this. I really want to do this. It's not safe, but I want to tell my body, if you will work with me and just, we're in this together, and let's stay really focused and alert and energetically aligned. And I think we could get down it. I just wonder what you, and again,
Mm-hmm.
this would have been, you could have called this your nurture. I might have called it your your manager that's saying, okay, you parts, I'm right. Or I don't think a higher self, I don't even know if this is true, but the idea, like, I really want this. It is a human desire. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual desire. It's a human desire. And I'm going to work to see if my whole body, I can work with it to get in alignment to do this and not freeze. That's my curiosity.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I don't even know. I mean, so we're back. You brought back in like let's talk about the 4 F's a little bit, because that feels like really relevant, right? So for me, when when I'm experiencing a lack of safety, when I feel unsafe in my system, right? I was going to say body, but it's beyond the body, right?
right.
It's inclusive of the body, but not isolated to the body. So when my system feels unsafe, I am going to personally, I've noticed this to be true, experience some energy of the 4 F's. So fight, for me, tends to feel like a rising, expanding, getting bigger. And in that rising, expanding, getting bigger, and like there's a lot of like energy that wants to move out of me. It's like I want to take up more space. But
Okay.
in that, I'm also usually feeling small.
Mm,
So there's this dichotomy. So I feel
right.
small, so I get big, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
one thing that happens to me. Um,
Hmm.
Another thing that happens to me is I might freeze. When I start to freeze, um, I will feel like everything is moving fast around me, but I will feel very slow.
Hmm.
Um, my mind tends to go blank, but not in a good way. Um, I will oftentimes feel slightly disoriented or confused. Um, I tend to feel like kind of the opposite of that, like outward going energy. It's like there's like a vibration that like kind of comes into my body.
Hmm.
Everything stops and comes in.
Looks like it
Um,
retracts by your
yeah,
where you.
and I can, one of the ways that I can track all of this is just noticing what's happening with my shoulders, right? So in the fight response, in general, my chest tends to puff out
Hmm.
and my head tends to go forward a little bit.
Hmm.
In the freeze response, it's kind of the opposite. I tend to cave in. I pull myself in a little bit. And this happens. So when I say I puff out my chest and I cave in my chest and pull myself in, those aren't things that I'm thinking about. They're things that just happen.
Right.
And they can happen in big ways or subtle ways, depending on the intensity of the situation. But the more that I'm aware of that, the more that I am capable of understanding where I am the safe or unsafe state, right?
Hmm.
Because just to speak to it, like we're using these two terms to identify what we would call like poles, right? So on one pole is like complete safety, and on the other pole is complete lack of safety or unsafe, right? But my experience in myself is I very rarely am experiencing one pole or the other in isolation. Usually I'm somewhere in between. And
Right.
sometimes I'm experiencing safety in one aspect of myself and a lack of safety in another aspect. And it's just like
Hmm.
which one. And so it's a constant dance, and it's very dynamic. And I want to make sure that that's understood for myself and anybody else. Um, so we had the fight, the freeze. So when I'm experiencing a flee, it's like my attention goes in the opposite direction of wherever I'm at.
Mhm.
And that might be purely in my mind, right? Where it's like I'm listening to something that I don't, for whatever reason, feel safe listening to, and I go somewhere else.
Mhm.
It could be more in my body where it's just like I have this itch to get away from wherever I'm at. I need to go somewhere. Um, and for me, it feels like my attention leaves the present, is kind of like that. That is my biggest like flee stimulus for
Mm.
myself personally. Um, and then the last of the four is fawn. And the fawn is also called like appeasing, often. And this is like, man, I see this everywhere. I feel like we've all learned to do this in like really big ways. I know it's true for myself. It's like, I will, so one of the places it actually comes up for me, and fawn for me comes from a very similar stimulus to both both freeze and flee. And it's developed from situations in which I did not or could not freeze, and I did
Mm.
not or could not flee to create safety. So, like, say, like as a kid, I want to run away and I'm grabbed and I
Mhm.
can't run away.
Mhm.
Or I shut down and I'm getting yelled at because I shut down.
Mhm.
And so I have to learn how to take care of the other person's experience to appease their experience so that I can stay safe.
Mhm.
And for me, that energy typically, again, it's like an abandonment of myself. I become hyper focused on what the other person is doing, saying, or feeling. Oftentimes becoming completely disconnected from my own body. So I feel like I feel disconnected
Mhm.
from myself. I typically feel invisible or like really, really tiny. Um, I get really uncomfortable with anybody putting focus on me.
Mhm.
Um, and in my body, I tend to feel absent. Like that's kind of like what I would say, like from a sensation perspective. It's like my sensations get dampened, like they're clouded, like I don't have full contact with them. Um, so those are kind of the four F's for me. Do you want to share anything about the four F's for you, Mom?
Well, I've always thought of myself as a freezer. Like
Mm,
I'll get numb. I will not be able to think. Um, I will have no access to memory, thought. I'm just. I feel like I'm a bumbling idiot at the moment,
mm,
or just silent, and I can't even talk. With the appease, uh, fawn, I have an experience of like hyper focused on the other,
mm,
like uh, the awareness that my assessing their temperament, their mood, their actions becomes the entire focus. So I don't. I mean, the idea that I have to abandon my needs, but I don't feel like I abandon my body. I feel not like my body goes on hyper alert to take
mm,
care of the other so I can be safe. And again, as you've been saying, this is not all conscious. I mean, I believe you and I have thought about this. So it's something that we're very aware of. And people who are listening to this may go, I don't know. So I like that we're discussing it because our examples might spark some awareness to just start noticing, start paying attention, which is the goal of the safety wheel and the exercises.
mhm,
I don't my fighting. Um, I can remember as a kid getting in fights primarily with my sister. I didn't like fighting. Fighting always scared me, and
mm,
being the youngest of four kids, all who were 4, 9, and 10 years older than me, fighting just felt like that's really stupid. Don't even
not gonna
don't,
win. Don't go
not
there.
even go there. So uh, fawning, freezing, or fleeing. And fleeing for me is I just disappearing. Like I don't even announce it. I just go do something else, like
Mm,
go take care of, or I withdraw from something and just say, no, I'm not interested.
mm-hmm,
So fleeing, I haven't had to have situations where I literally have to run to be safe.
mm,
But I would say that there are times like my morning walks, that's kind of in some ways fleeing the whole situation, just saying to everybody, I can't do anybody right now. This is me. So I don't know if that's like that could be considered fleeing on one end or really good self care on the other,
sure.
depending upon the other people's desires or needs. Um, so
I want to be careful with that because, hmm.
yeah, place. What do you?
So, because what I just heard was creating, like making it about somebody else, what your response was,
Uh-huh.
right? And so I feel like, I mean, maybe that can be true for you, but I'm wondering if, like, does someone else determine what my response is? Like, if I know that I need to go, and I'm not running away from something, but instead like taking care of myself, that feels different for me than like the flee of like I have to get away, like I'm running away. Is that
Okay, let me do it. So to me, there's the environmental, physical fleeing.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But let's say I wake up in the morning in this beautiful home, and I look around and there's a lot of to dos,
mm, mm-hmm,
and those to
mm-hmm,
dos feel oppressive.
mm-hmm,
So good self care is I'm taking myself for a walk to go into the hills and breathe and be in nature and be rejuvenated. But I'm also fleeing the mental, this is now my internal landscape, the
mm-hmm,
mental have tos of a home and being a homemaker
mm,
and taking care of things.
mm.
So it's a little teeter totter here
Sure,
between
sure.
yes, the nature and yes, the telling a part of me that says taking care of the home or the family or the situation as a mother or nurturer or homeowner is more important than your need for a walk. So it is really working with in my parts that have made up ideas about who I should be. And I could have actually handed that to my husband, my kids, my grandkids, the house, and go, you have that power over me. So again, it's an internal system that I've set up that I'm
Sure.
having to look at. So I think this is important because it's the nuances
Mm-hmm,
of all of our different parts and beliefs that we've made up
mm-hmm,
about how we're supposed to be or who we're supposed to be or whatever role we've taken on, that there's definitions of how it's supposed to be versus what's in our highest and best.
mm. So what you just spoke to is something that is like very interesting and up for me. So when I hear the supposed to and should,
Yes.
what I hear is appeasement.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That all feels like fawning to me.
Thank you. Yeah, that does, right.
And so when that's up, right? So if I go into fawn, right? So fawn to, and this is mine, so don't take this if it's not yours, but when I'm in fawn, what I know is that there is a response. Because okay, let's back. I'm gonna back up for a sec.
Okay.
Like I actually like physically backed up when I said
It's
that.
got,
That's cool. Yeah. Okay, so I started talking about like, so we have these poles of safe and unsafe, and
right.
oftentimes we're like somewhere in between, right? It's not like fully one or the other. And so we started off talking about like what safety is in our bodies, right? Like you shared an example that feels very resonant for me, so I'm just going to go with that. um and then brought in this thing of like, okay, so what about the opposite? Like, what is it to be unsafe, right? And then we bring in these 4 F's, and the 4 F's to me are all indicators that my system doesn't feel safe,
Mm,
right? So when any one of the 4 F's are up, I recognize that some aspect of me is telling me, some part is telling me, I don't feel safe right now.
hmm.
And so the 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 OGs, right? The originals, fight, flight, freeze. Like
Mm-hmm.
these are like the most, in my experience of them is that those are the most primal of these reactions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I use the word primal, what I mean is that they don't have to be learned.
Mm-hmm.
They're intrinsic. They're built into like deep levels of my nervous system. I know at some level how to do these things,
Mm-hmm.
right? The appeasement, the fawning feels like a learned behavior,
Hmm.
right? So as a kid, like I'm going to go back to infancy, right? And like take this, sit with it. I'm not saying this is true for anybody else, but it feels true for me. As a kid, I'm hungry, right? That hunger built, like I react to my hunger. I scream, I cry, I thrash about. If I get fed, I calm down. And I learn that it's safe for me to scream, fight, and crash, and like thrash about, right? Which is kind of an embodiment of these responses in some context, right? I can't run away, so I have to just get loud. If I'm not fed, and instead, like maybe I'm yelled at or put into isolation, I learn that those behaviors are not okay. My
Mm-hmm.
primal behaviors are not okay. And I learned that in order to get what I need to eat, right? Food just being a really like, and there's so many different places that this plays out. Food's just a really tangible example. Then I will learn how to meet the needs of the other people and to appease them so that I can get what I need, right? So for me, is that landing and making sense?
Well, I'm just taking it to a baby, and
Mm-hmm.
thinking the baby probably won't appease. The baby will probably begin to freeze and go numb
Mm-hmm.
because he or she will have to dissociate from the feelings in his or her body to be
Mm-hmm.
able to tolerate the discomfort of the hunger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I was just trying when you were doing appease, I was thinking in the animal kingdom, do I have any images of like, like a baby tiger mewing for mommy when mommy's gotten mad at him? Like, he's bit her nipple too hard and she, slaps him. And in his whimpering, and is that an appeasing, like, I'm sorry, let me back at the nipple.
Mm.
So I was just wondering if
Yeah,
it is.
sure. No, it makes a lot of sense that way. And so maybe I'm taking it too far by saying it's not like a primal response or is less primal. Um,
I think it's true that we've more recently identified it as
mm,
a survival method,
mhm.
but I'm not so sure that because we just identified it recently, not you and I, but in the world of psychology, that it hasn't actually been here.
Sure, sure. So, okay, let's, I think what you just brought in is good. And I also want to circle back to thank you for catching my language and helping me shift it. Um, when I feel into appease in the sense that I'm wanting to speak to for myself, it's this energy of I don't feel safe, but I'm gonna stay here anyway. And so I need to change what I'm doing in big ways to prioritize other people so that I can be safer in this
Right.
unsafe environment.
Because I depend on you for my safety in this case. I can't feed myself. I'm a baby, so I have to depend on you. So
Mhm,
in that interaction with you, what can I do with the interaction to have to help you get safe for me,
mhm,
in essence?
mhm, mhm. And to me, it can be really sticky.
Yes.
It can be
Oh, very,
really sticky.
very.
Um, and it's especially sticky in relationships. I use that word in like kind of like the big R context in terms of like in, interpersonal relationships as a whole, whether it's like just one-on-one or like a family or like a neighborhood or a city or like a general collective, right? Like oftentimes in my experience, these my experience is that most relationships are built on a hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, a la Carolyn Mace, she's that what we're doing here on this planet is learning to manage power.
Hmm.
And second energy system of relationship, it's a power dynamic.
Hmm.
Well, everything in life is a power dynamic. So
Hmm.
I totally high five you on. I totally agree.
And so in that, there's always like whoever has the most power is the one who ends up being appeased. And those
Yeah,
who feel disempowered or less powerful, like child, it could be a child, it could be a parent. The child could easily be the one who has the power. It depends on like the dynamic of any given relationship.
right.
Like we end up, when we feel less powerful, appeasing the other individual or individuals in order to feel safe, right? So like coming back to like where I got off on this little tangent, mom, you were talking about like, am I running away if I need to go for my walk, right? And
Mhm.
like you staying, and I remember this, right? I can be like, mommy, don't go, mommy, don't go. And like it's in all of our best interest for you to go for your walk,
Right.
right? And I remember like you used to say, what was it like, do you want a happy mommy or a grumpy mommy?
Right.
Right. And it's like, well, I really actually don't want a grumpy mommy. Okay, like let me go manage my feelings, like nurture myself over here in the corner while you go for your walk. I'm gonna cry for a little bit, but I'll be okay. But you leave and I'm playing, and then you come back and everybody's happy, right?
Right.
Um, but you staying would be like giving me the power,
Right.
right? And not even to make that wrong, right? So, and this is a good point to pause. At no, I want to be really careful that we're not saying that safety is good and lack of safety is bad.
That's a biggie. That's a hard concept to
But it's really important, right? So it's like, because I do this, right? Like I want to feel safe all the time,
Mhm.
but I'm a living being in a world that's not safe all the time. And so
Right.
it's not a realistic like thing to strive for. And if I identify safety as good and lack of safety as bad, anytime one of those responses comes up, I'm going to think there's something wrong with me,
Yeah. Right.
right? Because I want to be good,
Right.
right? Especially in a society that's built on original sin and good and bad as binary, like good and evil, right?
Right.
Which here in the U.S., like that's the general society that we live in, whether I personally identify with it or not. It's here, and it's impacting our views. Um, it's impacting my view. Let me speak from the I. Sorry.
Well, and just if we could expand this. So, first energy center in my world is tribal power. So, it has to do with I want to belong to the tribe. What are the codes of the tribe for me to be able to belong? So, to me, it's even bigger than good or bad. It's what will help me belong,
Sure.
which, which is again a part of safety.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
then we get binary, as you're putting it, is good or bad, but it's a reductionistic view of um, when the primary need is to belong to, which is why we are doing wired for connection. Like we're wired to belong and be
Mm-hmm.
part of a group. And what is the group? What are its values that we then said, I'm good if I have this value, so I can belong to this group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And in that, there's this thread that I'm like feeling and wanting to just pull in. So I'm actually going to pull up the safety wheel. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to pull this up for anybody that's watching this. For anybody that's just listening to it, the safety wheel is there's a link to be able to download a copy of it in your show notes. So definitely take a look at it. Um, so we have our safety wheel here, and the safety wheel at the center is safe and unsafe, right? When we're experiencing, so my aim for everybody, like truly, is that we feel safe as much of the time as we can.
Right.
I like safety. And I also like being able to go and explore something that is not safe, so long as I can all come back to safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I want to be able to have safety as my home base,
Mm-hmm.
where I can rest, recover, rejuvenate, learn, heal, or integrate, I guess. I like going into situations that might be less than safe, or other than safe, I should say, not a more and less, but just an other than, um, to learn. Like I go do things that are hard or challenging or feel uncomfortable, et cetera. And like I learn there, but I want to come back to safety to integrate that. Right. So safe and unsafe are at the core of this wheel. Right. And they make up, they expand outward through the whole wheel, right? Safe and unsafe are the field of the wheel, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And again, separating safe from right and unsafe from wrong and letting these just be the field, right? It's like maybe we say, like, maybe for me, like I feel safest during daytime when the sun is out. And I feel the most unsafe at night when there's no sun. It doesn't make the night bad. It just means that I feel safer during the day, right? And so if that's true, like what do I need to be able to relax at night? Right? Maybe I don't feel safe being out like in the fields or on the street at night, but I feel very safe at home cuddled up in my bed with my partner. Right? So can I nurture that? So I bring the right wrong thing back in because I want to really clearly state that for myself, and I invite anybody else this resonates with to engage this, is that when a lack of safety, when I feel unsafe, I am not doing anything wrong. I am receiving input that something needs to change if I want to be safe, or if I want to feel safe.
Nice. It's just a feedback loop, is what you're without evaluation, is what
Mm-hmm,
you're trying to do.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So since we have the wheel up, I wanna zoom back out to what you had just brought in, Mom, around like kind of first energy center, like collective identity, collective power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when I feel into that, I'm going out to environment,
Right.
right? And so environment exists at the outside edge of the safety wheel, right? And it exists there for a purpose because our environment shows us and shapes us,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you talked about like kind of collective codes, right? And so as young beings, we like receive the coding of our environment. We receive like what's acceptable, what's not, what's supported, what's not. What do basically like what do we need to do to be able to belong,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that belonging is at its core a state of safety, right?
Right.
When I belong, I am safe, right? And that's just one aspect,
Right.
right? Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, it's just interesting because let's say you start in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
you and you go out to the environment, you have thoughts and feelings about the environment and sensations about the environment, and now that comes all the way back into the internal uh, rings of the circle without having to be in the environment itself. It's like you've internalized the environment. So I just
Yeah.
address that.
Yes. Yes. And so the wheel is built again on the field of safety and lack of safety, safe and unsafe. The furthest ring is environment. The closest ring is sensations, right?
Right.
Because the body's language is that of sensations, right? That's how I think of it. I think of sensations being like the most foundational. It's like letters are to the alphabet, sensations are to the body's language, right?
Yes.
And so we have safe sensations and we have unsafe sensations. And when we use this, like there's two ways that we can look at this, right? So safe sensations can be and are for me sensations that I identify with my system feeling safe, right? So I have a state of safety. These sensations are here. This is what I associate with a state of safety. Oppositionally, if I'm in a state of lack of safety or unsafe, there's sensations that I associate with that, right?
Mhm.
There are also sensations that I associate as being safe sensations, not in the context of like I feel safe, but more in the context of like it's okay to feel these,
Mhm.
right? And then there are sensations that I have learned to deem as it's not okay to feel these, right? I like to bring a sexuality into this, right? So I had at a very early age learn to identify when sexual sensations or sensual sensations, erotic sensations, just basically any sensations that down in my pelvis, when they were safe and when they were not, which was situational based on what was happening around me,
Mhm.
right? So in one environment, it's okay to feel that. In another, it's not, right? And so I placed on these sensations values of safe or unsafe, which can and are pulled away over time, right? Where it's that can change, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, you're bringing up the theme or idea that I was on, which is where the environment is always, we're always in an interchange with environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like even in utero,
Mm-hmm.
the environment of our mother's placenta starts us off with sensations, and we may not have, and body areas and actions we may not have thought yet. I don't really know, but it's just interesting how, and now you're bringing in sexuality or sensuality so we're always in the environmental interplay with
Mm-hmm.
all the sections all the way down to the core.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
I to add that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. And like just to expand it just a little bit. So like I used like eroticism, sexuality, sensuality as an example, just because it feels like it's highly charged and like maybe easier to access from like a non-conceptual way.
Yes.
Um, but that interplay is everywhere, right? And
Right.
like what you just said, like our environment, which just to offer a definition to environment in the way that we're using it here is just anything outside of myself.
Hmm.
Um, is constantly influencing and programming me
Hmm.
and has been forever,
Right.
right?
Consciously or unconsciously. Right.
Right. So we have our sensations, which again, like I think of as the building blocks of the body's language, right? The alphabet, if you will. And
Hmm.
then we move out to emotions, and emotions to me are again like we can have safe and unsafe emotions, which just like sensations, I can have emotions that I associate with safety and emotions that I associate with lack of safety. And I can also have emotions that just feel like it's safe to have them situationally, and emotions that don't feel like it's safe to have them situationally. Like common example is like this whole idea that boys don't cry,
Right.
right? So the emotions of sadness for a boy might begin to feel unsafe depending on where they are. Maybe they can cry with their mom, maybe they can't. Um, Maybe they can cry with one friend, maybe they can't. But in a different context, like classroom, nope, not crying, right? With dad, not crying. With mom, not crying, right? And it depends, right? I'm giving these examples, like these are all personal, they're based on someone's individual experience. And I'm just offering examples that feel true for me. I think of emotions as mm, it's kind of like the tone and like delivery of sensations, right? So if we're thinking of it in terms of language, it's like the tone and the vibe of a conversation that's happening, the way that sentences are strung together, the way that they are spoken, um, like those feel like emotions in the body to me.
Hmm. And I'd like to add on the female side,
Mm-hmm.
most girls are brought up with you can't get angry.
Mm,
So angry, talking back, um, you know, getting your mouth washed out with soap, getting slapped for saying things. So boys have sadness or fear, and that isn't aren't allowed in girls. Typically, in my growing decades, it was always girls who aren't allowed to be angry.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry, I
I
wasn't
was
trying to.
say now we have the mean girls who've taken it to the extreme,
Mhm.
um, but yeah.
So one of the things that feels like it needs to be brought in here is the impact of time
Yes. Oh yeah.
on all of these, right? Because like what you just brought in was speaking to generationality, right? So
Hmm.
we're both speaking about these things from our particular placement in our own generations,
Right.
right? Which is so important to acknowledge because, like you just said, like it changes.
Hmm.
And over time, it will change a lot. And so part of like this wheel at its essence is a tool and a process to explore a spectrum of what safe and unsafe are to you
Hmm.
in your current placement in time, in our current placement in time, in our current placement in experience, et cetera, at a personal level. So this is not a tool that's telling you what safety and lack of safety are for you.
Right.
It's a tool to help you explore what those realities are in your own system and to begin to be able to work with your states of safety and lack of safety in ways that support you and those who you love and care about in nurturing connective relationships
Hmm.
that allow for your states of safety and lack of safety to receive what they need.
Right.
And that's really what this is all about. So as we're talking, it's like hopefully what we say lands in a way that helps you to understand, to move towards a deeper understanding of yourself. And please don't take anything that we say as just being an absolute truth for you or anybody else.
Right. Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, it just feels important, right?
Right.
Um, so from emotions, we go out to body areas and actions.
Hmm.
And so like if sensations are the alphabet and emotions are the tones and vibes of what we create, well then like the actual creations happen through our body areas and actions. Like
Hmm.
muscles stiffen, muscles relax, muscles move our joints, we adopt postures, um, and these different areas and actions of these areas um, may are associated with safety. Like I talked earlier about, for me, like when I feel like a lack of safety, oftentimes I'm either getting bigger or I'm getting smaller.
Hmm.
Um, and I say or, and I don't even know if it's an either or. It's usually like it's a both and it's kind of like a dynamic interplay.
Hmm.
Um, but those are ways that I experience that, and depending on the emotions that I'm having, like not every time that I hunch over do I feel unsafe,
Hmm.
right? I might be sad and it might be okay to be sad in that moment. And I'm still curling in on myself, right? And that's okay. It's not even because my environment's unsafe. Like I might actually feel very safe to do that in a particular environment, right? Which is an experience that like I wish for everybody, because it's for me, it took a long time to find that again after having it in childhood. Um, and then there's other body areas and actions that don't feel safe, right? Do you have anything you want to add to that, Mom?
Um, no, I think you did a good job.
Okay. And then we have thoughts, safe and unsafe. Mom, I want to hand this one to you. I feel like I really like listening to you talk about thoughts and like safety and lack of safety in thoughts. So when you consider for yourself, like how would you go into that?
Well, for me, some of this safe and unsafe starts like primally like just responses that, and it's only over time when we start developing a brain that can think,
Mm,
and assess, and that as we're doing, as we're in an environment, we're being taught certain things that we either take in as safety for us to survive or lack of safety. And given what's your environment defines as safe, will have a lot to do with how you think. And thoughts in my world um, control us a lot more than we actually pay attention to. And I can remember working with this woman, Byron Katie, and she had a concept called loving what is. And I thought of her as a thought therapist. And she had 4 concepts. Is that thought true? Is it really true? Prove it. How do you feel when you have that thought? And how do you feel if you let that thought go? Um, and the idea of being conscious that our thoughts create feelings and body physiology of safety versus lack of safety, and is so crucial. Um, and that if we're raised in a certain way of thinking, like, for instance, I was saying girls aren't supposed to get angry. Um, I was taught girls aren't supposed to be angry. You are supposed to appease, kind of what you were pointing to earlier, and that will keep you safer. So the idea that then I scan for appeasing and lose track of the internalized, this doesn't feel good to be appeasing. It pisses me off, actually. I'm mad at appeasing. A part of me is mad that I'm appeasing, and another part is telling me if you don't appease, you're going to get in worse trouble. So now I have this little war within my own thought patterns, going at it. And the idea of like, how can I take a step back, look at these are just 2 different thought patterns, and if I'm breathing and grounding and looking at these thoughts and going through a process of, is that really true? Is it really true? Prove it. I can oftentimes disconnect me from the thought, see where it came from, see that it doesn't feel good. And the idea that it's not feeling good, I always refer to people I've studied. So this is another Candace Pert who wrote Molecules of Emotion. And she talked about how that our cellular structures are wired with receptor sites for endorphins. So the idea of like, why don't we feel better when we have all these endorphin receptor sites? Well, you have to have good feelings and good feeling thoughts to be able to create endorphins.
Mm.
So I just thought that was fascinating that our body physiology even says this notion of feeling good is an okay feeling, rather than, again, how I was raised, be a hard worker, work, do. That's how you get points. That whole achievement esteem in my environment, that was survival in my family.
Mhm.
And just absorbing it without even knowing I was. So I just think it's interesting how we absorb things unconsciously, and it's only through exercises like these, or that we start looking at what is actually running our bodies and our lives.
Mm.
Uh, and thoughts have a lot to do with it, because we absorb thoughts, we believe they're true, we go along unquestioning them, and they can get us in trouble, or they can uh, lead us out of trouble, lead
Mhm.
us to safety, lead us out of safety.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
don't know if that was how that landed, or if it.
No, I think it's really good. I love everything that you just said, and it leads me to something that I feel like thoughts. So there's a reason that environment's on the outside, and there's a reason that thoughts are right inside of it. Um, and like you just said, thoughts end up forming our association with the container of our lives,
Mhm,
right? And so when I think of a sensation, or I associate a sensation as being safe or unsafe, that comes from the realm of thoughts. It's an association,
mhm,
right? Um, Same thing with body areas and actions, emotions, etc. Right? And it's really important for me to understand that, like you just said, that like my thoughts are my thoughts are a result of my experience within my environment,
mhm.
right?
And
And
past history, right?
what?
And past history.
Mhm. Hmm.
not only your own, but genetic lineage
Right. And
passed on.
so like we are programmed by the container of our society,
Hmm.
right? And it was interesting what you were just sharing about endorphins. And it leads me, what it led me to is this, oh, well, our environment has not been built to keep us safe.
Hmm.
Our environment has like the vast majority of our like cultural environment has been built around basically creating profit.
Achievement.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And in that achievement, like that achievement has nothing to do with our safety internally, like the
Right.
safety of our sensations, emotions, and body areas and actions.
Hmm.
And so it's no surprise to me then that we would be basically like not producing the endorphins that we could produce if we were feeling like safe as a base level, right? Because my experience of myself and most people is that the base, if left unexamined, is more unsafe than safe.
Hmm.
Base state, like that field is more the majority than not, right? Which shows up in the news. It shows up, I mean, it shows up anywhere that you look. If you're paying attention to it, if I'm paying
Right.
attention to it, it shows up. And
Right.
so we've talked about environment the whole time, so I don't feel like I need to go into environment in more depth. Um, but I want to, as we're kind of closing up for today, just go a little bit more into like what this wheel is intended for, right? Which we've talked about, but I want to speak to it directly, that this tool and process is a tool for self-evaluation and reflection. Um,
Yeah.
and as I say evaluation, I want to be careful with that because I don't mean that in like a hierarchical context. It's not
How
like,
about awareness?
yeah, so self-awareness and reflection. And so the idea is to begin tracking and looking at this field of safety and lack of safety from the aspects of body sensations, emotions, body areas and actions, thoughts and environment, and to begin to learn and understand for ourselves what safety actually exists as and what lack of safety actually exists as in real and tangible ways. The intent being that this information supports us in cultivating more connective relationships to both
Hmm.
ourselves and those whom we love and care about.
Right.
Um, with that, I also want to speak to like, so some of us like to use this tool as like, say, like you just want to like use this for yourself, like by yourself. That might be great for someone who has a baseline experience of working with sensations, emotions, thought forms, and body physiology stuff. Um, if you don't have that baseline, this is something that I would probably recommend like having some support with. Um, we're building a course, like a full curriculum that goes along with this to guide the process. Um, the one pager that you're going to be able to receive with this podcast is basically just kind of like a precursor to that. That course is not fully built yet. It is going to be available in the near future, so you can stay tuned. And then both Mom, you, Donna, and myself also offer, we do this work in private containers. And so I know, Mom, your availability is usually fairly sparse
Right.
because you're in high demand. My availability is a little bit more open. And so if someone wanted to go into this and explore how to use this wheel for themselves and what might be possible in using it, um, that is something that we're here for.
Yes.
Um, the last piece that I want to just speak to, if you go to the landing page that's linked on the safety wheel on this podcast, wiredforconnection.life/safety wheel, safety hyphen wheel. Um, you'll see an image, a video of the wheel in motion. This wheel is not static.
Yeah.
All of these rings are in motion. Um, and that motion is dynamic. So what's safe now might become unsafe later, and vice versa, depending on all kinds of things in our internal and external being. So environment internal and environment external. So just want to put that in here because that feels really important to always acknowledge this is not static, it is dynamic.
Good. I like that.
Anything else that you want to add today, Mom?
Just love doing this with you. I think this is very valuable for ourselves, our own awareness, and anybody who can find their way to us. I want to put the word out. Just keep coming in, people. We're
Cool.
here to help.
Cool. Well, I'm excited about this. This feels like I've been working towards this for a long time.
Yes, yes.
I know you have as well. So it feels really cool to have it kind of landing in a tangible form that feels like digestible and shareable.